next story is an example of a fairy tale, and it comes from the Grimm brothers, who collected stories in the early to mid part of the 19th century. They would have listened to these stories as told by often elderly people round the fireside. They also edited some of them and amended them in certain ways to make them a bit more palatable to a young readership. Once upon a time, and it wasn't my time, it wasn't your time, but it was somebody's time, there was a girl by the name of Gretchen. Now Gretchen, she lived with her stepmother and her stepsisters, and life was hard for her. Gretchen did all of the work around the house. She swept the floors, she fetched the water, she did the washing up and the cooking, she stitched and sewed. She was busy from dawn till dusk, and no matter how hard she worked, her stepmother was never satisfied. Meanwhile, her stepsister did nothing all day. One day Gretchen was out in the pure bright sunlight, sitting on the edge of a great well, and there she was stitching and sewing and sewing and stitching, because she had a blouse that she had to finish making. All of a sudden she pricked her finger. Ow! And she dropped the needle all the way down into the very deep, dark depths of the well, and she thought, how on earth can I finish off what I got to do? I'll have to go back and get another needle. And so she left the well and she ran all the way back to the little cottage where she lived in the edge of the forest, and she crept into the house, and she was just going over to the needle box and lifting the lid when in came her stepmother. Why are you here? You've done what? You've lost the needle? You've lost it down the well? Have another. You shan't. Go and get the one from down in the well. Go and get that. Poor Gretchen, she went back to the well. She peered down into the depths. She thought, how will I ever get it back? But she clambered up onto the rim of the well. She reached up. She took hold of the chain around the bucket. She leapt up. She put her feet in the bucket and down, down, down. She went into the dark depths of the well until suddenly all went black. When she awoke, she found herself in a meadow. All around her she could see beautiful flowers. She could hear birds singing. She could see butterflies flitting from one bloom to another. And she thought, I must have died. I must have died and gone to heaven. But surely if I've gone to heaven, Jesus should be here to greet me. What should I do? But then in the distance she saw some smoke, and she knew that where there was smoke there must be a fire, and if there was a fire there were sure to be people there, and so she started walking across the meadow. After a while she heard singing. Oh, take me out, take me out, take me out, for I've been baked for a very long time. Oh, take me out, take me out, take me out, for I've been baked for a very long time. There in the meadow was an old oven. She went over to the oven. She could smell all sorts of delicious things baking within it. She could smell bread and muffins and scones and pies. Oh, there were all manner of things, and they smelt so delicious. And she thought, well, they're asking to be taken out. If I leave them, they might burn. She went over to the latch, and the latch was hot, but she was determined not to let the things burn, and so she lifted the latch. She pulled open the door of the oven. She was greeted with a hot blast of air. Then she looked around and she could see a great big pizza shovel. And she pushed it in and she took out tray after tray of delicious things. And she stood there looking at them as they cooled. And she was very tempted to try something, but there was no one to ask, and so she walked on. After a while, she came to a gate, and as she pushed it open, she found herself in an orchard full of all manner of trees. There were apple trees and pear trees, plums, and all of a sudden those trees, they began to sway. Oh, shake me, for my apples also ripe. Oh, shake me, for my apples are also ripe. Well, she could see so many trees, also full of succulent fruit. And she thought, well, I should do what the tree's asking of me. So she went to each and every trunk, and she shook each and every tree until the fruit had fallen onto the ground, and she made them into neat little piles. And though those apples looked so rosy and ripe and sweet, she didn't take one because she knew you really ought to ask. And so she walked to the edge of the orchard and she went through another gate, and she found herself in a courtyard. And across the courtyard, where chickens were scratching around, she could see a little cottage. And she went over to the door of the cottage, and it was slightly ajar, and so she peered in. Well, it was quite dark inside, but she could see a shape, a figure. She could see an old chair in front of a fire. And at first she thought it was a sack sitting there, but it wasn't a sack, because it shifted. And all of a sudden, she saw the face of an old woman, and she thought, oh, it's a witch, it isn't heaven after all, I've gone to hell. And she was about to turn and run away when the old woman got up and said, there, my dear, you don't need to be afraid of me. My name is Mother Holle. Come. If you could just help me a little each and every day by getting the quilt on my bed and shaking the feathers till the feathers fly. If you could shake the feathers in my quilt until the feathers fly, then down upon earth it would snow. Now do you think you could help me, my dear? And Gretchen wasn't so frightened any longer now, and so she said, yes, I'll help you, Mother Holle. And so Gretchen stayed with the old woman, and each and every morning after the old lady had got up, she got the quilt and she shook the feathers till the feathers flew. She shook the feathers till the feathers flew. And she didn't just do that. She swept up and she cleaned. She helped prepare the food. She fetched water. In the evenings, the old lady would sit her down and she would tell her stories. Stories of faraway lands, stories of handsome princes, stories of dragons and witches and ogres. And Hedda would just sit there and listen. Time rolled on, and Gretchen, one morning woke up and thought, I feel a little sad, and I'm not sure why. I think perhaps I ought to go home. And she went over to old Mother Holle and she said, could I go home, please? Of course, my dear. You've always been free to go whenever you choose. Come with me. And she took her by the hand and they walked back through the orchard. And then they went into the meadow. And there, where there had been no gate before, there was a beautiful golden gate. And old Mother Holle said, step through the gate, my dear, step through the gate. But first of all, take this. And she passed the needle back over to Gretchen. And Gretchen, she took it and she popped it into a pinafore. And she looked at the old woman and she said, thank you. And the old woman said, step through the gate and you will get what you deserve, my dear. And Gretchen, she stepped through the gate. And all of a sudden, there was brilliant light all around her. And when she looked at her clothes, she could see she was no longer dressed in rags and tatters, but she had a beautiful soft silk dress upon her body. And in her pockets, why, there were golden coins. And there she was, next to the well. And all was different. And she ran all the way back up to the cottage, and she burst in through the door, and she told a tale. The words tumbled out of her. And the stepmother, stepsister listened. And then the stepsister said, "Give me that needle." And she snatched it from Gretchen, and she ran all the way to the well. And then she threw the needle down, and she leapt up onto the wall of the well. And then she leapt up, and she grabbed the chain, and her feet were in the bucket, and all went dark. When she awoke, she found herself in the very meadow that Gretchen had described. She could see butterflies and flowers, and she started walking because she knew what she wanted. All of a sudden she heard singing, "Oh, take me out, take me out, take me out, for I've been baked for a very long time. Oh, take me out, take me out, take me out, for I've been baked for a very long time." She could see the oven. She could smell all sorts of delicious things within the oven. But she could feel how hot it was, and she thought, "I don't want to burn my fingers. Why should I? What do I care if those things burn?" And so she walked on. And after a while, she came to the orchard that Gretchen had described. She pushed open the door, and she walked into the orchard, and straight away, the trees that were now full again began to sway. "Oh, shake me, for my apples are also ripe. Oh, shake me, for my apples are also ripe." But she looked at all of the trees, the apple trees, the pear trees, the peach trees, the plum trees, and she thought, "Oh, it'll be an awful lot of work. One of those plums might fall on my head and spoil my hair. No, why should I?" And she walked on, and she went out of the gate on the other side of the orchard, and she was now in that little courtyard, and she could see the cottage, and she walked straight over to the door, and she burst right in. And there was the old lady sitting in front of the fire, and she said, "Hello, old Mother Holle, I've come to help. I've come to help you, because I'm sure you benefit from my help. And then, no doubt you'll want to reward me, won't you?" And the old woman looked at the girl and said, "Well, if you can stay with me, and you can get my quilt, and you can shake the feathers till the feathers fly, then in time you will get what you deserve." And so the girl stayed, and on the first morning she got the quilt and she shook the feathers till the feathers flew. But on the second morning all she did was smooth it down. On the third morning she didn't get out of bed until lunchtime. And she did nothing else to help old Mother Holle. She didn't fetch anything, she didn't clean anything, and she was not even grateful for the food that was made to her. After just a few days, she said, Mother Holle, I'm feeling so homesick. Please, can I go home now?" "Of course you can, my dear. Come with me." And she led her back through the orchard, back into the meadow, and she held out the needle. And the stepsister said, "I didn't come here for that," and she pushed it away. And old Mother Holle looked at her and said, "Step through the gate and get what you deserve." And the stepsister, she stepped through the gate, and everything went black. And all of a sudden she could see that her fine clothes were nothing but rags and tatters. And when she looked in her pockets, all she had were leaves. And her hands and her face, it was as if they were covered in grime and dirt. And no matter what she did to clean her face and her hands, she never could from that day onwards. And so I'm certain that she didn't live happily ever after. But Gretchen did.